Bang. Well, here we are, Language of Healing live on a Tuesday afternoon on this last day of June in 2020. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 2 of the book, What's in It for Me? What are the benefits of learning a new language? And hello to everybody in the room. We have a moderator with us that is pretty unique. She's my friend. She's Arleana Waller. Arleana is the founder of She Power Academy, which empowers young women. Is it called the MLK Initiative?
MLK Community Initiative.
MLK Community Initiative. Here's what I know about Arleana. She is an agent of change in my city, Bakersfield, California, which is a very diverse city. But we're right in the middle of California's own Bible Belt, so that brings its own set of challenges and whatnot. But Arleana is a voice for those who don't have one. And I was very thrilled when she said yes to come in. So Arleana, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bob. It is really an honor to be here. And I have to tell you, this book is life-changing. I have so many notes and write and hearts and love. It's really been a game changer, even for me who understand the importance of having these kinds of conversations. So I want to thank you, Bob, and thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Anita, for writing such a great book. And it's really my honor to be here, especially during these times when I think this conversation is critical and we must be guided along the way. And so, Bob, it is my honor to call you a friend and to be here with you all today.
Good.
So I would love to just take the first 15 minutes and really just kind of direct some questions to the authors and to kind of hear your voices. And then we're going to continue that conversation with those who are a guest today. And hopefully those who are listening out on Facebook Live can take something away from today and be better than you were when you joined this conversation. I'm going to really just kind of kick it off to Anita. In chapter 2, which I love the title, What's in It for Me, because I think that's what we're all asking. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, what's in it for me? You talked about exploring community in predominantly white churches. Yet you also mentioned that many in your old community saw you as a sellout. What was your motivation to step outside your experiences?
Motivation is a really loaded word there. The initial motivation for that, the initial moving out, was probably location. I moved to the suburbs, and I was in a different type of community where the churches, certainly from a cultural and ethnic standpoint, looked different. And so they were just closer. But also it was very divine for me, because several years ago, just growing up in the 60s, I always wondered, why are we so separate at church? Why are there white churches and black churches? Why do white churches plant inner city churches? That was always of interest to me, even in my teens. And so I came to understand, of course, culturally and historically, we know that there was a time we couldn't go to church together. But that's not the excuse anymore. So, why is it now? And so initially the motivation was, I asked God, hey, God, if you want to use me as a tool, a conduit, to do that, to bring Black people and white people particularly together on Sunday, I'm game to do it. But you know what? Fast forward, I have forgotten that little prayer. So when the day it shows up and you go to that church and you walk in and you go, oh my gosh, I don't know any of these songs. Where did these songs come from? Oh my goodness. And so I just can remember it being a real interesting thing. After that, there were people. Once I identified with the white church, there were people who had asked me to speak at Black churches, and they would kind of look at me like, "Oh, we like you, but why are you over there?" You could tell that there was a struggle of belonging over there, as well as some white people in churches going, "No, why are you over here?" And so you had kind of this double whammy of, we don't quite know if you belong here, but you belong here. And so, of course, never being a sellout, because I was being authentic to who I was supposed to be. And so at the end of the day, that was it. But it's interesting how we talk kingdom stuff, but at the end of the day, there are times that we walk in churches and don't think certain people should be there. And that was my experience. So my motivation was to be where I was supposed to be.
Well, I think that's a great point. And just really leaving your comfort zone. And so I'm going to direct the next question to Wayne. You mentioned the benefit of leaving your comfort zones, but you also called it a two-sided coin. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I could. Arnita just expressed it well, and I think Bob and Arnita do in the paragraphs that follow, that stepping out of your comfort zone sometimes risks your comfort zone. You may expand it and get some other people inside of it, but then some of your friends and people who like the little comfort zone that you were in with them, they get threatened by the fact that you moved out of it. So on the one hand, you're expanding your own. There's more places where I'm comfortable. On the other hand, some of the people I've been comfortable with in the past may not be as comfortable with who I'm loving and who I'm having conversations about. Even the current climate, I've noticed you can always tell when I'm talking with people whether or not they actually have cross-cultural relationships or whether they're talking about issues just by what they hear in social media or from cable news or whatever. They're talking about issues instead of talking about people they know. And they're always trying to figure out, what I read here, is this true, not true, based on a book, which no book is going to speak for everybody of any particular cultural persuasion, right? And so I think the whole thing of risking our comfort zone and expanding it is a great thing, but you're never sure what you're risking when you do it. And I think the point of this chapter is it's always worth the risk, no matter what relationships change, to expand your capacity to love other people and to know intimately what they're going through and some of their struggles is only going to make you a better citizen in the earth.
And I love that in chapter 2. I think the message was consistent. It's always worth the risk. And it's very fearful sometimes if we haven't entered into those spaces. So I'm going to direct my next question to Bob. You mentioned fear as a primary motivation that keeps us from stepping out of our experiences. What part does fear play?
Fear is that ever-present voice that's on our shoulder, telling us you better not. There will be consequences, and lo and behold, guess what? There are consequences for stepping outside. I experienced what Arnita did just before the pandemic hit. We started going to a predominantly Black church, and I'm telling you right now, worship went for over an hour and I knew one song. And so I feel that. But fear is always going to keep us in line, whether it's the fear of rejection, which is a real big one. A lot of people find community, spiritual community among churches and whatnot. So you don't want to say something that's not the party line. You have to toe the line if you want to continue to be part of the family. And I can tell you, from my experience, when you do start asking different questions, even if you don't have the answers, if you just start asking different questions, you're going to find yourself being looked at in a different way. But as Wayne said, it's worth it every time to overcome that fear.
I actually saw this take place on Facebook, where a young lady who has never really publicly went on the other side, but have always had friends. She had that conversation publicly, and she was really attacked for having a different opinion, for taking the risk publicly. So, Arnita, I want to ask you the next question. And it kind of leads into this. You mentioned that the dominant culture can choose to live life apart from minority cultures, but the opposite isn't true. Could you give us a few examples of that?
Well, part of what we are facing in our national dialogue right now is the fact that so many people realize I do not have any minority people in my life. I do not have it. How have you gone 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years and not have any minority Black or brown people in your life? Well, it's probably because you chose to do that. Now, that in and of itself says something, and I don't want to get into that, but people can choose to socially segregate. It's not a legal issue anymore. It's more of a matter of a heart. It could be a matter of of location. It could be a matter of a lot of things. But if you really want to build relationships with different people, you can now. I cannot think of any. I've never worked in a city or a country where Black people held the power lines. I haven't. And so at some point I'm going to have to cross with someone of white descent, because they're holding the power lines in the country. That is not necessarily so for white people in America. And I think some of the some of the illumination that's happening now is the fact that, you know what, I've lived a long time and I really don't have, as Wayne said, people who I can call and have a conversation with, or even invite over to dinner. I just don't know people who are different. When you choose to socially segregate, I just don't know that you have a voice to try and speak and help to people who are not doing that, because it's really hard and messy when we start putting different people together with different backgrounds and different socialization. There's a lot of conflict that comes with that, but it's good conflict. So that's what I mean.
So I think it's interesting, because a lot of times people will say, but I do have, friends from different groups. I talk to them at work. I talk to them at school. But you're talking about really getting involved with them and taking the risk to publicly discuss the differences, to have those kind of conversations, to bring them into your homes, or really intimate, personal relationships.
Sure. Even if you don't, social media is not the place to have those type of discussions. But even if you want to try and start one, trust me, the language of healing discussion group is off the chain right now. So we are having some pretty heated stuff in there, and I'm loving it. But ideally, let me tell you what I do, Arleana, and this is just my little checkpoint. I will go look at people's personal Facebook pages, and if I don't see Black and brown people, I really don't listen a whole lot to what they're saying. It's just, it's kind of like, oh, well, you have a lot of theory about this, probably don't have any practice, and you're fighting me and debating me on when I'm trying to lead you there. So again, if people have different people of color in their lives, they understand some of the things that we're talking about in a national dialogue right now more so than others. If not, you'll debate it to death. So just leave it there.
And I love that with Wayne. I was reading in chapter 2, and he was telling a story about his daughter, which I have to tell you, I put big hearts all around that section. You tell a story of watching your daughter treat others with honor. After watching you do the same thing throughout her life, how do parents speaking a language of healing have an effect on their children?
I think it's one of the greatest joys of it. The fact that the kids learn so much from our example. We never intended to teach our kids those things. If I had known what I know now, I would have tried to intentionally teach my kids those things, but we didn't. We just had a lot of people in and through our home, different cultures, different backgrounds, different skin colors. And our kids got comfortable. We didn't, even as a family, we're together as a family. We never had a kids table over here and the adults over there. We mixed everybody up. So there was an ability for my kids to negotiate a variety of friendships. I travel a lot. I stay in people's homes when I travel. And instantly you can recognize kids that are like 12, 13, 14, very comfortable with adults, and kids that are not. Kids that feel like, yeah, they shouldn't be in the conversation. They kind of sneak off in the back room somewhere. And I really appreciate it. Nothing makes me more blessed as a dad than to watch my kids have the variety of friendships they have in their relationships, and how they're able to reach across a lot of lines to love and care about other people.
And I love that. And I think parents should be intentional about helping their children build those relationships, because they're better humans for it.
For sure.
Which leads me to Bob. Boy, you mentioned that your connections with the LGBTQ community, as well as with Muslims, has cost you friends. You even said you've gotten hate mail over it. Why keep going in that direction?
Because those are people that don't just need me. I need them. I need them. Some of my dearest friends fall in those two categories that you just mentioned. And they are among the most marginalized, misunderstood, put in the corner folks on this earth. So it becomes a mission of mine to find those who are misunderstood and marginalized. It's what I do. I mean, if I have a brand, that's the brand, is I'm going to sit with the broken. And so I have seen great treasure come from that. I sat with my Muslim friend Ahmad just last week. We had a very nice social distancing breakfast, and we hadn't seen each other since the pandemic. And for an hour and a half, he poured into me. He poured into me. I had a conversation with Paul Swearingen, who's on this call earlier today, and I told him it was the most remarkable thing ever, because this guy looks at me, because I'm the guy that will say, how did I end up here? How did I end up getting invited into this? Or how do I get to do that? And he stopped me. He said, Bob, he said, you need to know something. You don't know who you are. Those are words I use on people. I use those words. And he's using them on me. He said, you don't know who you are. He said, every room you find yourself in, you have a right to be there. And he said, and you need to start living life that way. From a Muslim who happens to be my friend. And it was almost like, if I want to put it into Christian terms, it was almost like he was prophesying over me. But he was certainly pouring into me. And I took it. I took it because, oh my gosh, he's someone that knows me well. So for someone, when someone knows you that way, to say those kinds of words, there it is.
I think that's very powerful, because I think that's the first step, being comfortable. Sometimes we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable in order to start building those relationships. And I want to share something, and we're going to open it up to our guests as well to join the conversation. When Bob and I first sat down to have our coffee, Bob has a way of taking you and making you open up in ways you didn't even know was possible. I was broken and I needed a Bob in my life at that time. I had just recently experienced some racial hate in a way that shook me to my core. And it startled me so that I was afraid of white men. And when I would see them, I would look down, because that's who targeted me in a way that I have never been targeted in my life. And it was so bad that we had to make a police report. And when you came into my life, I was a little afraid of you. But you were so warm and you were so open. That was the start of repairing what someone had damaged me as an adult. And had we not met and had that uncomfortable conversation, I don't know if I would be here having this conversation. So when you're talking about, reaching out to people who are different than you, the power of your words literally changed my life. So I want to say thank you. I don't think I've ever told you that, but thank you. It was a changing point for me.
That hits me in a pretty good spot, Arleana. Thank you.
And there's a lot of people out there waiting to have that conversation. So I love the fact that the authors are encouraging that conversation. So I want to take this opportunity, and I want to hear from our guests as well. You can ask the authors questions, or you can have comments. And I'm going to start from the top, and I'm going to go down so everyone's voice can be heard. And Maria, I'm going to start with you. Welcome.
I'm Maria Kill, and I'm from the Dallas area.
So what are your thoughts on the conversation as it relates so far?
I find all of the comments so far to really be true and important. And I really liked your comment to Bob about the healing effect that his conversation had on you, because I think that's the opportunity we all have. Most of us at some point in our life get hurt or damaged by someone else. And we have the opportunity, as those people cross our paths, to acknowledge them, to validate them, and to speak to their pain. And what a great privilege. So I really appreciate that example that you gave. And I think as those of us who are struggling with how can I be a part of helping heal what's going on in our community and country, I think that's a fantastic example of how we do that one-on-one.
And I love that, Maria. How can I be a part? Humanity. I mean, humanity. That's, we don't have to complicate this thing. It's really simple. Let's just talk heart from heart. Harvey, welcome in. Let's get in the conversation.
Hey, hello. My name is Harvey, and I'm from Ohio. And I've met Wayne so far, and I've met Arnita online. Um, was there a question?
Well, we're letting you kind of share your thoughts for the top of this conversation.
Okay, gotcha.
As it relates to
Um,
chapter 2, what's in it for me?
What's in it for me, and what's really been in it for me to start with was um, helping me better relate to my wife, which was kind of unexpected. And going forward, it has helped me connect with the different people of color that were already in my life that I was overlooking. But for me, it's really been about exploring my own heart and expanding it, and the desires that are in there that are good. And I'm really at the beginning process of this, and it it feels good, it feels right, and it feels like my heart is expanding, if that makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense, and I think that's a great start.
Arlena,
Elsa?
can I say something about Harvey?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, Harvey shared this recently on his Facebook page. We've been friends for about 10 years or so. And Harvey actually at a very young age was moved to, was it Colombia or some South
Bolivia.
American country? Bolivia. And so he grew up not being part of the dominant culture. And some of the things, bullying, some of the things he suffered, he was sharing that, how it's really informed him now to be on the other side of that conversation and help other people find their way into it. That was interesting.
I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
Elsa, chapter 2, how did that speak to you?
Hi, I'm Elsa. I'm in the DFW Metroplex area. I've had a chance to meet all of you guys and know Arnita personally, but chapter 2 really spoke to me because I personally was exposed to different cultures and backgrounds my entire life. I was always taught to be able to love different people and to be integrated in different ways, even in times when I was not of the predominant people group. I lived in places like Japan, went to Christian school, and me and my brothers were the only, Black people within the system, but I still always felt, included and loved and all that stuff. And then coming to the United States, it's always felt so segregated, and I've had to actually be much more intentional to make sure that I get to know other people, and that I am involved in so many different groups with people who are not Black and who are not like me. So there's had to be so much more intentionality. And this chapter talks about that, the importance of us going out of our way almost to make sure that we don't just stay in our groups, and that we get to understand other people's, language and their culture and their ways of being. And I think that's very, very important for every single one of us to take that extra step to get to know people a little bit differently than staying within our groups.
I think that's absolutely spot on. Paul, have you ever had to go out of your way to intentionally build relationships outside of your comfort zone?
Yeah, very much in this last season of my life. Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Hope I didn't jump in and cut anybody off. Yeah, I found myself drawn to being very intentional about forming relationships with people outside my comfort zone, and people in the LGBTQ community, particularly people of different races. My wife and I both have been sort of thrown into these discussions about racial inequality in our city of Fresno, California, which is about 2 hours up the road from where Bob lives. And it's been wonderful, because when you talk about what's in it for me, and yes, it has cost me some with my people group and my friends, and I get some pretty wild private messages from people, and some not so private. But when I was growing up, I knew in our very conservative Christian culture that we were right, we were going to heaven, God loved us. And I looked out at those people that were going to hell, and they seemed pretty happy, and they seemed to love people. And I used to remember thinking as a kid, I wish I wish we could love people too, but we can't because we've got to try to win them to Christ. And if they say no to Christ, well, then I have to brush the dust off my hands and wipe them away. And now realizing that I get to love people just where they are has given me a full life of relationship and experience of people that I never got to have before.
You know, I love that. And
let me jump in. I just want you guys to know who Paul is. I mean, Paul and Ashley in Fresno. Paul was a pastor of a church that he founded for how many years, Paul?
10 years.
10 years. Just stepped away just less than a year ago. And his wife, Ashley, was the mayor of Fresno for 8 years, Paul?
Yeah, 2 terms.
Yeah, 2 terms. So it comes with significant cost for someone who fits that description. Well, is that accurate, Paul, that it comes with cost?
Yeah, I think Jesus sitting with the woman at the well came with cost, and it's part of the gig.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think if we took a message away, that's it. I mean, Jesus paid a cost. What makes us any different? Julie, welcome. You got to unmute yourself too. I would love to hear from your perspective. Chapter 2, what's in it for me?
Hi, sorry, I hadn't got the email, but thrilled to be here. What's in it for me? What's in it for me is to learn how to help my grandsons, who are varying shades of brown, help them learn how to not be afraid of the world. And what's in it for me is being able to reach out and love people. I mean, like you said, it just, that's got to be where it starts. It can't be about superficial things. It's got to be about where our hearts are and our humanity is. And I've got these little boys that look at me and call me Nana, and there's just things I want to protect them from, but I can't. And so I want to help them process. And I hope to leave them a better world than what we have right now.
And I think that speaks volumes to what the book talks about. When you get to know people on a personal level, you love and fight a little bit different. So I think that you're in that space. Yeah, absolutely. Herschel, can you unmute yourself also? Chapter 2, what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. Let me hear your perspective.
All right. Well, I live in a county that is 98% white, and I pastor a church in that area, and so it's quite unique. So what's in it for me is really my calling is to be a bridge builder, and to be that point of connection. I've lived across the country. I was smiling at some of my DFW friends. We lived in Cedar Hill. We actually moved to Ohio from Cedar Hill, and moved into rural Amish country, and it's been quite interesting. But really, for me, we are better together. Our lives are richer. I think about the tapestry of the kingdom is woven together with so many beautiful and deep colors. And so for me to be in our family, to be that bridge, that point of connection that maybe people, for folks who live where we live, much of what their experience of people of color is whatever they see on TV or saw in the news and or on social media. And so there are a lot of times, a lot of ideas that once you get to know someone and connect on a personal level, you realize we're all just human.
I think that's very powerful. How do we get to the place to where we have those uncomfortable conversations so that those who may not be ready, like those of us who are on the Zoom call, to understand that we really are all human? Because you see a lot of combativeness going and people being attacked when they want to think different than the way they were raised to think. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I could say something quickly. Especially with the things that have been going on in our environment. One of the verses of Jesus that has just popped out to me, and I've been kind of living by, is where he consistently kind of says, "Let those who have ears hear," and realizing that, while in general we're called to build bridges. It is for those who are ready to hear that we can begin to really do the work. And so being available, being willing, what do? We're willing to reach out, to step out. And then those who are ready, we engage and we connect, and it just keeps on multiplying as it goes out from there.
Hey, I like what you said, Herschel, about let those who have ears hear. It also says, although they have ears, they will not hear. Yes. And although they have eyes, they cannot see. So your distinction of we can't reach everybody with this bridge, I think is spot on. I know for me, my generation, people that look like me, it's like there's so many times we're so set in our ways. And we've just done it this way since the 50s or the 60s, and we don't have any interest in hearing anything new. Again, a reference in a conversation I had with my friend Paul this morning, I find it interesting that the Lord rescued the children of Israel from out of Egypt, slavery, and they don't know what to do with themselves in the wilderness, where only 2 of 12 say we can take the land. And so literally an entire generation died out. And it was the young that went into the land, 40 and younger, except for Joshua and Caleb and their family. That to me is a super interesting reality, because oftentimes when I sit with people who are my age, their eyes glaze over. Honestly, I can look and I can see I'm not making a connection with them this way. They don't want to hear these types of messages. But when I sit with young, it is 100% universal that they are ready to receive and ready for something new. There's been not a rejection of Jesus, not a rejection of Christianity, but a rejection of the way they've seen that portrayed. And so when someone my age comes along and says, hey, this may not be what you think it is, they're like, you said what? And it works.
Feel free to join into the conversation. I don't have to call your name. You have some comments. We're just going to have dialogue. So feel free to jump in.
I think part of what also needs to happen for us to be able to continue this work is to remove self-preservation. So many of us want to preserve our culture, our ideologies, and our ways of being, that we don't give enough of a chance to get to know other people. And so if we try to just remove the ways that we try to preserve ourselves and preserve our way of being, it will open up room for us to explore just knowledge from other people and be able to help us to be bridge builders and help us to be able to share our knowledge and wisdom with other people. And I also love, Bob, how you talked about the younger generation. I'm part of that generation. And when I try to talk to my elders about topics like this, it's literally like you said, like their eyes are glazed over and it's like you're speaking a foreign language, And I think part of the reason is because the older generation is trying to preserve something that they think they're going to lose if this new way of thinking comes in. And at the end of the day, we can together be able to work in a way that educates and, shares. And, we think about even like how racism and Jim Crow and all these things work. It was really to preserve the white race. It was to make sure that white people had certain things that other, cultures couldn't come and take away from them. So if we stop being so selfish and stop focusing so much on ourselves and trying to preserve what we have and begin to really love our neighbors and give to our neighbors, it opens room for all of this stuff to really start being dismantled.
I'd like to speak a little bit to, I'm glad that we're talking about the individual responsibility that we have. I get a number of questions or messages about the language of healing. Why are you guys not talking about systemic racism? Because this book scope chose not to talk about that. It's not that we don't understand that systemic racism is certainly a part of it, but at the end of the day, you have the ability to change your mind, your perspectives, your paradigms on things. And hopefully, eventually, if we get enough of that overturned, eventually the system changes because people make up the system too. So I just kind of want to say that we see this as such an individual and specific thing. We understand there are people who want to sit down and talk to me, and I'm not going to give them 1 nanosecond because they're not ready. And I'm not a fair person to have this discussion with if you're not ready. So they just don't have ears to hear me. So they may can hear Jesus, but they can't hear Arnita. So just that's really true. We want people to understand this is an individual work. Work on yourself being able to have a conversation without looking glazed over. I mean, why be glazed over when someone is really trying to have discourse and dialogue with you, rather than immediately go for debate? And that's something that I'm just finding. Immediately people pull out the debate piece and I'm like, but that's not what I'm looking for. So just thought I would drop that in.
But people that look like me, Arnita, we have to defend our position. We have to. And I'm going to tell you guys, there's a legitimate fear that if we make room at the table, we will eventually lose our seat. If you think this isn't about power, you're sadly mistaken, because it is. It's a struggle for power, and we see the table not as infinite. I like to see this really long table where, more people come. Let's add to the table. But people that look like me have a tendency to think that the table is finite, and there's only so many places at it. And if I invite you in, then eventually I'm going to lose my spot. And plus, Patricia Grimsley said something in the Language of Healing group while she's watching this about what it means to sit with the broken. She asked an open question: what does that mean? Does it mean broken by circumstances? And I think it does. I think it means those who have, and broken probably isn't the right word. I had a young gay man once tell me, he said, don't ever refer to me as broken. He said, I am a whole person. I am not broken. He said, I would take wounded from you. And so wounded is probably a better word than broken, Patricia. But yeah, it's people that have been tossed around by life who have lived life misunderstood. That's simply what I meant, but broken isn't the best word.
I love the word wounded.
Yes. I think though there are opportunities with the older generation, I've been really pleasantly surprised, for instance, at my church, at how quickly engaged some of the older members of our church have jumped right on board with this and taken responsibility and are actively pushing for new thoughts and ways we need to change, and being really open to that. And I do think that anywhere that we do have spheres of influence, whether that's in our work or our church, and can just start conversations, because sometimes people are ready and we don't know it. And I've seen a lot of our friends kind of coming to realization about this in the same way that I had, that there were biases I just didn't even know I had till I read this book and started engaging with our friends who are people of color and started to recognize it. And so I think the conversation itself is important, because there may be people who are just waiting and to be pointed in a direction, and we need to take advantage of every one of those opportunities we can.
I would jump in and add that I was one of those people, even though I'm nowhere near as old as Bob, not even close. But I was one whose eyes would glaze over when we hit any of those stories about taking care of the poor or the foreigner, and what it took for me was a new vision of who God is, and I equate it with the story of the parable of the minas. I suddenly realized I was the one mina guy hiding my gifts in the ground because I had a really mean God who, if I stepped out of line, was going to punish me. And when I realized that that was a misjudgment of the master and that God actually wanted me to love and have love returned to me, and he loved the mess of relationship and of us getting it wrong and working it through together, suddenly then I was able to put my gifts out there and be me and take back from other people. And so I just think if we could get a different view, that because I think there are a lot of people who believe God is a really angry, judgmental God, and therefore we have to be angry and judgmental to others as well. So if that vision starts to change, it changes how I interact with God, commandment number 1, and how I interact with others in commandment number 2.
Can I jump in?
I've never heard that. Absolutely, Herschel.
I want to share just a quick story as we're talking about just the hope that can be found with people maybe who live longer than I have. And I want to just share a quick story from when we first moved here to Ohio. It was probably my second week at the church, and I noticed this older gentleman, and he was staring at me. And he watched me and he watched me. And after I finished my sermon, he came up to me and he said, "I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm going to struggle with the fact that you're Black." And I kind of smiled and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to be friends." And I think about chapter number 2, and I think somebody quotes there at the end, the quote, "People remember how you make them feel." So I invested into relationship with my friend, and we spent hours and hours, and there were questions that, as we got to know one another, he shared about growing up, he did not have very much exposure to people of color, and the couple of experiences that he had were negative experiences. And then so from there, he formed conclusions about who all Black people were, and it was wonderful to me, though. And I'll just say he passed away about a year ago, but we grew in our friendship to the point where, he would call me his little brother, and he'd come into our church is in a coffee shop, and he'd come into the coffee shop asking, "Where's my little brother?" And one of the most meaningful things to me when he passed away, his family asked would I speak and speak for him at his services, and it was just a beautiful story of how people can connect if they decide to connect. And many times the fears that we have, they're real, and they're based on maybe limited experience, but real experience. And it takes somebody who's willing to step across and take that risk and say, yes, maybe there's something different than what you've experienced before.
What I love about that is, Herschel, is I love that he came to you with such vulnerability. Yes. I don't like you because of your skin color. he just kind of put it out there. Now, yes, I appreciate that, because I'm gonna lean into you when I know that, if you let me. But look at what happened. He was just vulnerable. You can tell he was thinking, I don't like him, but I probably don't like him just because of how he looks. But now I'm getting ready to be invited into a relationship with him. That's what a language of healing is. If you've lived away and separate and apart from people who are different, however they are different, please work with your own self enough to be able to have the courage and the fortitude to invite a different person into relationship. Bob, Wayne, and I, that's a win if everybody who reads the book does it. That's a win for us. That's just enough. That's just enough.
And I love the honesty in the book that's shared, because I think the power of truth and the power of honesty is how we start actually healing. And so that's a phenomenal. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot is racism in the church. leaders, are they dealing with racism in the church, or are they not dealing with racism in the church? And that's open to the floor.
That
Elsa looked like she got something to say.
I'm just gonna get my popcorn on this one and sit back and
somebody else
keep
is
doing
going to have
what
to
you're doing.
start, because this is one that's extremely sensitive for me, and I'm not sure that I need time to really chew on that question, because yeah, so.
Well,
I think it's a difficult question. I've been reading some stuff recently, and you read different books, whether written by blacks or whites or whatever, and we're defining racism so differently. There's a name for it now that works through the culture. What I love about this chapter, and I love about this book and story, Herschel, that you told, and some of the others, is that what we're really talking about is breaking down the stereotypes that we have. No matter where we grew up, we've got stereotypes. And the human brain somehow finds it advantageous to put things into groups so it doesn't have to handle everything individually. And that serves us well in some settings, but in what we're talking about now, not at all. Until you get to know someone, and we were talking earlier about those people that don't have ears to hear yet, and they're not ready for this. I've got people in my life that aren't ready to let other people in from different cultures. But when they become my friend, and here's what I was thinking, one of the best things we do with friendships is if you have a friend, you're going to share your friend with your other friends. So there are people I know that are absolutely against illegal immigration. They fit in that whole conservative profile of deport them all, that whole thing. My closest friend back home is an undocumented worker here in America. Has been here for 30 years, raised 2 kids here. He's become a great friend of mine. And so if you come to my house, you're probably going to meet Lewis, because I'm going to invite him over to meet with you. And you don't even have to know whether he's here legally or not. Yeah, you don't have to know that. Once you get to know Lewis, things begin to change about how you see a lot of in the world. Same thing's true across racial lines and across everything. By doing it, we break down the stereotypes, and that's a good thing. Heard a preacher say last week, and he's a black preacher, he said, race is arbitrary. There's nothing different about us genetically that marks by skin color, whether it's intelligence, strength, all the stuff we try to measure. Race is arbitrary, but it's not arbitrary in the culture because of the way we've taken skin color and done horrible cultural things with it. And I get excited in my life to let other people just get to know people I know. I mean, people I introduce Arleana to, and from my life, it changes their view of the world. And I love that. So even if they're like unwilling to read the book and have this conversation or whatever, if I bring those friends to my friends, eventually they'll change too, because they'll start seeing people as people instead of their classification by whatever they've learned from their past.
And I think too, I love what Herschel said. He didn't get offended. It's like, here's a man like, I'm not sure about you because you're black. That he didn't get offended. And Arleana, you said something, you mentioned that I can be hurt, but I didn't get offended. And there's a huge, I think, misunderstanding. I don't even know what the word is, but we choose our offense. And as we talk to people who, are outside our own echo chambers, watch out for those times. I mean, sometimes I'll feel like, oh, I don't like that, but sit with it, hang with it, and just really watch and see and listen and learn, and just choose not to be offended.
Well, it's not that what people are saying is not enough to make you offended. I want to be clear on that.
But I'm
people say some crazy stuff and expect you to sit there and listen to it. And so, but I do think for people who are going to do this type of work, because this is a work. I didn't realize everybody didn't make it a priority to keep everybody together. I learned that the hard way, as we say. But it is offensive stuff. But if it's part of what you have aligned as a value for you, you'll see it differently. I know most of the time, if people say something crazy, I know they don't know me. It's probably not personal. It's a stereotype or something they've learned, or they've been taught that they're just superior to everybody on the planet. So you're right, but I'm never meaning that people don't say offensive things. They really do. And
and there's room for pushback.
Yeah.
But if you choose to live in the offense, then
It's hard to
neither one
move
of you
past it.
gain. Neither one of you.
So,
I think that's the secret, not to live in the offense. Go ahead, Maria.
well, I just want to respond to your question about our churches dealing with it. Our church is trying to deal with it. And we've been, I appreciate that our leadership has been very proactive in saying, we're going to talk about this and not once. We're going to engage this conversation for quite some time. And so we've been, for instance, on Wednesday night, we have a Zoom meeting like this, and our senior pastor, will share a topic. Like one of them recently was Martin Luther King's letter to white pastors. And he asked everybody to read it ahead of time and said, let's talk about it. And we had an hour-long conversation about that. We've invited one of our interim worship leaders from another state, who is a person of color. He was there Sunday morning, and our service was them having a dialogue about what his experience has been like and what he wants us to know. And so, I would say we're muddling through. We're doing our best. It's a bit messy, and I appreciate that people from time to time at our church said, I'm not racist. I feel like I'm being attacked, for being a white person is being racist when I'm not. But we were able then to have a dialogue about, well, what ways may you have some bias you might not even be aware of, and things like that in a healthy way, and I think in a loving and kind way. And so there are some churches doing it. We're probably stumbling over ourselves and making some mistakes, I'm sure, because we're new to this, but we're trying, and that's encouraging to me, and I'm optimistic that we're not the only ones doing that.
That's great to hear, Maria. That's great. Elsa, are you ready?
Elsa, you ready?
Well, I'm so glad, Maria, that your church is doing something and they're actually speaking out. It's very rare. What I find interesting is how many churches are now hopping on this bandwagon of discussing systemic racism, prejudice, and all the other things. We as a church are supposed to be at the forefront of things, not on the back end. And so society and culture should not be the ones pushing us to have discussions like this. We should be the ones leading in these discussions. And so what has been really, really frustrating for me is watching the church be at the rear of all of this and having them sort of like echo popular, pop culture instead of really focus on addressing the sin that is racism and the way that we even segregate ourselves within the church because of our, financial, being the way we are financially. We segregate ourselves by our skin colors, and just even, with the LGBTQ community, single moms, different ways that we find to ourselves segregating ourselves within churches. And it's so frustrating, again, that we're doing this work now. We should have been speaking about this stuff a long time ago. We should not have the death of another person happen before we go, oh, this one is a really big deal, so now let's talk about it. Really? How many?
I think that goes back to what, sorry.
No,
go ahead. No, please do.
How many people have to die before we go, oh, this is important enough? Jesus didn't wait for, the stones to get thrown at the woman who was caught in adultery before he goes, oh, well, let me address it. He addressed the Pharisees right then and there. He addressed the issues right then and there. But we consistently wait for the problem to get big enough before we start addressing it. And I think part of the reason why we do that is because, especially in white churches, at least from what I've seen, because if we start talking about these topics, we disturb complacency, and then we lose financial gain. And at the end of the day, is the money that you're earning in the church worth more than the lives that are being marginalized in your pews? And so that becomes really, really frustrating for me, that we're putting mammon and finances ahead of people's lives and ahead of care and love for people who are genuinely hurt and genuinely feeling like, I don't belong in here, but I love Jesus. how do I fit in? And we're not making it comfortable because we are trying to, make the larger population and dominant power group feel at ease with what's going on. And we do that with our politics and everything. And it's so frustrating to me. So anyway, go ahead.
Amen. Good.
Amen.
I hear it in there. I hear it in your voice. Yes.
I think we're in a season where the white evangelical church needs to be offended. I just don't think we're going to change without being offended. I posted a letter that a friend of mine sent me from a pastor named Freddie Haynes in Dallas.
Pastor Freddie Haynes is in Dallas.
Yeah, and he wrote a letter to the white evangelical church that is very offensive. It should be offensive to white evangelicals. But I think Jesus liked to offend people. He would say, eat my flesh and drink my blood, to see who was still going to stick around after the offensive thing was said, who was willing to go deeper. And so I actually think we're in a season, and my friends from the communities of color in our area, I've been asking how I can help in this season, and they're like, say something. We're tired of being the ones to always have to drive the conversation, and we're tired of worrying about white people's feelings. Let's start speaking honestly, and we need you, Paul. And some of my friends are saying, because you don't have a pulpit to protect anymore, we need you to speak up. And so I do think it's a season where we need to quit coddling our feelings and be honest about what's been happening for a long, long, long time. So I'm sorry if I'm offensive to white evangelicals, but I think it's time to be offended.
Paul, I need
Let me ask you a question.
You don't need to be sorry.
We both really need to ask Paul a question.
Paul brought me some healing. He said offending people is okay. I'm just good. I'm good.
Paul, if you had a pulpit to defend, to protect, would this be different for you today?
That's exactly what I was going to ask him.
I mean, I also hit it. I was terrified of my people and my peers and my income. I mean, there's no question about it for years. And I saw this right-wing evangelicalism as a problem for a long, long time. And even mildly speaking about it would cause people to get up and leave the church. And so I do think God has sort of put me in a position to speak up a little bit on it. And I mean, I understand if your income is at risk, it's a little bit scary, and I get that. But so I think it's time for some of us who are sort of inside, but maybe not inside, to be able to speak up and say, come on, white people, let's rethink this. And we've been silent for too long. We haven't cared enough for too long, and our eyes have glazed over for too long. So anyway, I'll stop preaching now.
So in the book, I would ask, in the book we talk about racism as a sin, right? That was kind of mentioned. So when you are talking about white evangelists who are holding back and not doing the work of the Lord in the way that he would do it because they're trying to keep their income, trying to keep their parishioners happy, are they truly doing the work of God? Or are you sinning? I know we're not the judge, but that's an interesting question. Go ahead, Wayne.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, to what I was going to say or to respond to you.
Wayne, go ahead.
Respond.
No, it really, really helps, I think, Alyssa, to have people like you express that kind of frustration. That really is good. I mean, you can say, like they always say, it's the best time to plant an oak tree was 25 years ago. The second best time is to plant it now. If you didn't do it then, you got to do it now. So we got to do it now. But I tell you, you're right. The frustration has been there for a long time. I still think there's an awful lot of churches / magazines / media companies / whatever. They all function on a very slim profit margin. So you don't have to lose most of your income. For most entities, they lose 10% of their income. The whole thing unravels. And it does lead, I think what you said, Arleana, is true. It does lead to a lot of really bad decisions. Jesus warned us, you can't serve God and mammon. You can't do it. If you're going to try and balance God and mammon, mammon's always going to win. And that's why for so long, we've not made the decisions that have been helpful in this environment. And it's basically because people weren't ready to hear it. And I'm hoping now people are. I'm hoping now we can have these conversations, that people are ready to hear it. And man, my heart hurts for you, Elsa, wishing, boy, why couldn't you guys done this 50 years ago? I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And it makes my heart hurt for you. And I'm really sorry that we didn't.
Yeah, in some ways, Elsa, I feel like I need to repent. You know, I was one. I didn't say what I knew God had in my heart because I was afraid of offending my people.
I was just
That's
going
a
to say
start.
in congruence with Elsa, you know, there are some of us who understand that being conduits to the Black white church is part of our destiny, it's part of our purpose. It's just very hard to have a voice in there when you can't be Black and Christian simultaneously. And you end up being attacked in the problem when you're just trying to bring another level of truth, which the Holy Spirit gives us all truth, to the body. But it's easier for you to demonize me and say, oh, she's this is disunity, this is not harmony. Oh my gosh, when you hear all of that, when actually you're just trying to bring another perspective, but it's just not, it's not respected enough, or it's not personal enough, or it's not a priority. I just don't think racism in America is a priority for most churches. I don't. And from a leadership perspective,
the power of the dominant culture is not easily yielded. It just isn't. And so, Elsa, to your point, it would be great if everybody just fell in love with humanity and we all did the right thing just because it's the right thing. But the dominant culture that holds the power is only going to move at the pace that the culture forces it to. Jackie Robinson became a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers because society was heading in a direction and the Dodgers saw an opportunity to be first. We can look throughout history at how slowly things move, and it all boils down to money and power, all of it. We just don't want to share.
And I think it's hard sometimes to accept the fact that money and power rules the church. And Elsa, I see it in your face. Like, this is a very tender space for you. And I think we got a confirmation just on the line that that is in fact what's happening. So I think these kind of conversations have to continue happening. And hopefully, you know, we can move past that, you know, where that's not in the church, because that's our safe haven. That's where we go to be restored. We're going to be wrapping up in probably about 7 or 8 minutes, but I want to hear from some of those who haven't really spoken much. Kind of want to hear what's on your heart and what's in your mind. Harvey, I would love to hear more from you if you're open to that. But you have to unmute yourself. You have to, are you going to unmute? There we go.
I'm back. Yeah, one of the things that we've discovered here is you talk about money and power going together. And I don't go to a Sunday gathering like a lot of Christians do, but I do have a small business. And I felt that tug myself, me and my wife, just the little bit we've spoken out on social media. And we had to actually sit down and have a conversation. And the conversation was, how much are we willing to risk? And because we had one of our employees threaten to quit just because of some social media posts I had done, and there wasn't, and it wasn't much. And so I almost lost one of my lead employees at my business. And then we had people, we put a sign up that said, George Floyd matters, honk for change on our business sign. And we had people calling us, demanding we take it down. We had people coming into the warehouse and saying, we need to talk to Harvey. Where is he? And so there, and we've noticed a significant impact on our market page, on different people and our business because of it. But it was a choice that we sat down together, and we knew it was going to take some form of hit. We didn't know what it was, but the cost was greater to be quiet. We felt like we had been quiet too long, and to be quiet was to be complicit in it. And so, yeah, it's real.
It's really good.
That is powerful.
Yeah, it is.
That is powerful.
But one thing about the language of healing, and even in dealing with my employee that was disgruntled, and different family members and different people in our community that have approached me about it, this book has been a huge gift in learning how to have a healing dialogue and to take down the rhetoric in a way that we can get at the heart of the issue, rather than a lot of times I found that it's not even really about the race issue with them. There's something else going on in their life, and this just happens to be what they're outraged at this moment. And so yeah, it's been a huge gift to me.
I think that's powerful. You took the risk and you found out that it was worth it. And I think that's a great start.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you saw Herschel. He's one of the people I've been practicing with. He's become a good friend and ally, and been able to practice the language of healing with him. He's been a huge gift in our life, him and his family.
Okay. Awesome.
That gives me all kind of heart feels.
Awesome. And I'm like,
and guys, that's probably a good place for us to put a pin in it and end it. We've been going for about an hour. And Arleana, you are the boss at this.
Thank you, Arleana.
Yes,
Great job.
And
You need a talk show, girl.
Oh, no kidding. She knows it too. She does. And thanks to all the people that were on the panel. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. And the one in 2 weeks is going to be, pardon me, your tribe is showing. So, oh my gosh, there might be some fireworks. So, thank you to all. Until the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.